Just before we cross over to the panel that we have for you this morning, let's cross over then and look at how bad that situation has been. Let's look at what has been the government's deficit in each financial year, all the way from where we're starting this morning. And that review period, therefore, is going to show you from 2015 up to where we are right now in 2020 that our expenditure trend has been on a rise. Fine. Let's cross over to another data point that we have for you this morning that's going to elucidate exactly how the government has been taking our domestic debt. And it's not bad, because if you look at banking institutions all the way up to December 31st, they were accounting for 53.29%. And therefore, the latest announcement, again from CBK, is bound to push that percentage higher. And that is followed by insurance companies by pension funds, and then insurance companies at 6.44%. All right. Let's look at what has been our deficit in terms of financing for each financial year. And you can see generally the trend it has been that, well, our deficit has been widening year after year. And I'm talking about each financial year. So the talk about how the government wants to manage our deficit has also been sort of pushed wider by the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's up to March, therefore, that you saw us go back into those bigger debt levels, because we're trying to fill in what was a deficit that also was dug into our collections by the coronavirus pandemic. This morning, I want us to introduce George Menga and Tim Kipchumba this morning to our conversation. Let me start with you, George. It's fine, because if you look at that debt by holder, banking institutions, again, continue to account for the biggest chunk of government borrowing. But let's understand, because this headline was from last week, and we treated it as a breaking news. It is just 5 billion. Are things that bad?
Elijah, things are not good. Let me put it that way. Our fiscal management has not been very prudent, if I was to put it that way. Elijah, you remember there's a time in this country where we were able to finance all our fiscal expenditures with our revenues. That is, if you go back and look at the year 2003, 2004, that has been flipped on its head, so to speak.
Yes.
And from the year 2013 coming upwards, as you've just tabulated, I've just shown to our viewers, the gap between the revenues that we collect vis-a-vis our expenditure is increasing year in, year out. And that explains why the government has been on a borrowing spree, so to speak. So in as much as we are collecting money that goes into treasury, our expenditure is way up there, and our revenue collection cannot match with our expenditures. Treasury mandarins, or those who are in the policy departments at Treasury, will tell you that maybe this has been brought about by the two-tier government that we have. But I want to believe that is not the case. You remember the 2010 Constitution of Kenya, when it brought the county governments into place. The spirit of that evolution was that money was to follow function. So that if a function was being done by the central government,
yes,
that function, if devolved to the county government, then that revenue goes to the county government. So I think it has been a mismanagement, so to speak, of our fiscal side. That notwithstanding, Elijah, the pandemic has brought a lot of pain, so to speak, into the management of our revenues. Remember, between March 2020 to date, there were some taxes. The government introduced some tax breaks, and those tax breaks had a direct effect on the amount that we could collect as a country from those taxes. For example, pay as you earn was affected. value-added tax was affected, income tax was affected. So for the period between March 2020 to December 2020, we probably missed our revenues by close to 30-40%. That's a very huge. That's a very huge amount if you put it now into context. So that as it were, 2021 probably looked to be a better year, but I have not seen tangible policies from Treasury to remedy the situation that we already are in. Borrowing from parastatals, Elijah, can tell you, is a short-term measure. It is not something that is sustainable in the long term, because some of these parastatals, you remember, they maintain these cash reserves so that they can be able to sustain their operations as they go along. Remember what was happening with KPLC. KPLC had been making profit for some time, but in 2019, 2020, they have started making losses. So those cash reserves are meant to cushion such parastatals as they go into the future. But if the government goes into picking those cash reserves, then you leave these companies into a very precarious position, such that if there were any shocks in the market, then they'll be candidates for wind up or candidates for insolvency, Elijah. So I don't think that is the best strategy, or that's the best direction that the government wants to take at this time.
Pretty much. George, just before I cross over to Tim this morning, let's just go back, therefore, to what was a tax performance for the financial year 2019-2020. And I'm going to come back to so we actually look at it as well. Because if you look at the ones that were heavily hit, we're talking about domestic VAT that went a negative 7%, domestic excise that went a negative 6.4%, that we're talking about all taxes which went a negative 1.4%. All right, George, let's cross over to what was the exchequer revenue for period 31st December, July to 31st December 2020. Again, George, you're going to hear them tell us that, well, that period was good for the exchequer, for the taxman, because, well, our tax collections sort of were on a high. We actually were able to even surpass our targets for January 2021. Now, if we go back to our tax performance for financial year 2019-2020 again, domestic VAT is back to where it was, 16%. Domestic excise is back to where it was. All taxes, George, as we're going to talk about this morning, on the highest so far. So why again say, well, things are bad, when in reality the taxman is even telling you from the other side that, well, January, we've passed the tax collections by 2%. VAT is back. All taxes on a high. Corporate tax is going to go back to where it was. PAYE and corporation tax, they're back to where they're supposed to be. Are we using this period, George, to correct our mistakes in the past? Because those are two sort of new conversations that are headed in the same direction.
Elijah, can put it to you directly that our fiscal management has been wanting. We've not been efficient in the way we manage our finances. Yes. All the way from 2013, so to speak, Elijah. I'll not be shy to say that, because if you look at the quantum growth in our debt vis-a-vis the economic growth in the country, then the two don't match up. The taxman has really tried to push it aside so much, and in fact that effect is being now felt into the market. That the taxman is becoming very aggressive in pursuing taxes for people to pay the taxes, but that is not translating into real GDP growth. Remember last year we had projected to do between 3-4%. Maybe it could be lower. We've not gotten the figures yet. But you'd expect that if our debt is growing by, say, 30, 40, 50%, then our real GDP should be growing by at least 10 to 15%, so that we match up the two. But that has not happened. Instead, government expenditure has been increasing year in, year out. And if you look at the way what projects or what areas the government is spending its revenue, they are not projects that have immediate return into the government coffers. That explains why the government late last year and early this year was not able to finance some of its maturing debt, because some of those projects where they have sunk money are not returning money immediately. Maybe they'll return money in the future, but not immediately. So
Yes.
anybody sitting at Treasury, Elijah, should start thinking on how we can remedy our situation as it is now, than putting in stopgap measures like now borrowing from the parastatals or drawing money from the parastatals. If you draw money from CBK, for example, Elijah, CBK is meant to stabilize our inflation levels, and also our FX translation vis-a-vis the hard currencies. If they don't have enough reserves, Elijah, to be able to manage that, then that is where you find the inflation rate starts skyrocketing in the economy, or the Kenya shilling becomes very weak in the economy, as you've seen. In fact, last year we were trading Kenya shillings around 102, 103. We are now trading at 109, 110. Those could be the pointers of where we are heading. So we need to, as a country, we need to sit down and just re-strategize and look at our fiscal policies. Are they in tandem with what we expect to achieve at the end of this year or at the end of next year? And this policy should be either we should have short-term policies, medium policies, and long-term policies, so that we don't have knee-jerk reactions to treat things that could be medium-term or long-term, Elijah.
Pretty much. At this point, let me bring in a Tim Kipchumba. Tim, I mean, yes, it's a good one, but if you see exactly what the Treasury is saying, that they give us this money in view of the very exceptional environment that was brought about by the unforeseen global pandemic that greatly put a strain on government collections. You therefore like to think, Tim, that, well, if that is out of the COVID-19 pandemic, then we would have gone back and asked ourselves, how much did KRA miss in collections? And the answer that's going to come out of that, Tim, is going to be they missed it by 107 billion. And so you'll say, well, we are going back for 107 billion, and that's it. Then we'll be fine. But Tim, no. We've gone for we've gone for debt reliefs, one. We've gone for an IMF loan, 263B to be exact. Now, again, there's 5B from the Central Bank of Kenya. Is that just a way to sort of correct our messes by, quote unquote, using the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse?
I mean, the correct answer is right. It's I mean, just to paint the picture, Simba, which yes. I think Amol has also done a good job at, we collect 1.67 trillion. 1.67 trillion. We spend 2.7 trillion. So we're already spending $1 billion more. One of the biggest problems we have, and we've been having for the last 6-7 years, is a budget problem. We spend more than we have.
Yes.
We're spending 500 billion more, 600 billion more, 700 billion more. Now we are spending $1 billion more than we have. That's not the only problem, is that for the first time now, we actually have a real cash crunch. So today, if you read the dailies, I mean, you have close to $1 billion shillings in wages and regarding expenditure. You then have 1 billion shillings that we need to pay as debt service. That's already 2 billion. That's already more than our revenue. So of course, there is no way that we can fix that. I mean, there is no way of fixing that without shrinking expenditure.
Yes.
And where we are now, there is very little to shrink. In fact, my fear would be counties would be the first casualties. And if we are not very careful as a country, also default on our loans. And so the problem has to be both. One has to be shrinking expenditure, and then the other one is growing revenue, which has not happened in equal measure. As a matter of fact, while the excuse is pandemic now, KRA actually in their own press release say they are very happy with the collection for last year. As a matter of fact, they say we exceeded expectations. So the problem isn't that. The problem is that, I mean, this is simple. If you are a family today and you earn 50,000 shillings combined, what government is doing is that they are not spending 50 shillings. They budget to spend 100,000. They spend to budget double. They're budgeting. They spend more than they earn, and
Yes.
they don't just. That's not even enough. It's that they budget to spend more than they earn, and on top of that, they spend even more than they budgeted. If you look at our expenditures in the last 6 years, we've always budgeted for more than we have, 500 billion, 600 billion, 700 billion, 800 billion, but on top of that, spend even more than we budgeted. And so it's a budget problem. Treasury just needs to fix budget. Number two is a revenue problem. They need to grow the economy. They should be putting more money in agriculture, putting more money in places, putting more money in places that are more productive so that revenue can be generated. And so I think it's a twofold problem. They need to fix both the expense problem and they need to fix both revenue problem.
Pretty much. All right, gentlemen, let's cross over to the next issue that we have for you this morning on our table, where now new NHI reforms will say each household in the country make a contribution of 500 shillings to the National Hospital Insurance Fund, NHIF, as the state looks to set up a health cover for all Kenyan families. Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukuri Yatani announced that each household will contribute 500 shillings monthly, which will translate to 6,000 annually to be covered under the Universal Health Coverage. That's a UHC scheme for outpatient and inpatient services, including maternity, dialysis, cancer treatment, and surgery. In his notes in the budget policy statement, CS Ukuri Yatani notes, and I quote, government focus is on the establishment of a mandatory UHC scheme to be managed by the NHIF and regulated by the Ministry of Health and act as the national scheme for all persons resident in Kenya, notwithstanding one's social status. End quote. Now, the planned mandatory NHIF membership for all Kenyans will be an upgrade of the current scheme where only workers in the formal sector are compelled to join. All right, just before we cross over to you, Tim, let's cross over and see exactly how we've been spending to the health sector in the country. All right, and that's exactly how it's been. And you can see from 2018 up to where we are right now in 2020, 2021, we've been receiving an incremental amount of money to the health sector. Right now it stands at 50.3 billion, inclusive of the government's plan for the universal health care. All right, let's talk about then what has been the NHIF payouts, and they have been increasing as well, which sort of shows you that, well, there's this stress for the government to move into the UHC plan. Good, Tim. 500 shillings, which translates to 6,000 bob. Visible, going by what our country is?
Where will Kenyans get 6,000 bob from additional?
Is it possible to say they're going to get 500,000 a month? Sorry, 500 shillings a month?
Where will they, I mean, so if you are a border, if you are an house help in this country, where will you get 500 bob disposable income that you can send to government? I mean, I actually don't really think that it's a universal health coverage. I think that government is also trying to really raise money in order to show up the finances to NHIF, and in turn, NHIF will lend back to government at a lower interest. I really don't think that they mean well. This will be a very, very unpopular move coming at a time when they are going to elections. I mean, Kenyans, 80% of us earn less than 50,000 shillings. Majority of those 80% earn less than 20,000 shillings. People don't have an additional 500 shillings to send to the kitty. And how will they even enforce that? Like, how do you actually go about making sure that a mamamboga, a house help, can actually surrender 500 shillings to the kitty? I think that it's a fantastic idea to try to get people universal health coverage, but it's the wrong timing. People are coming out of elections. You're just increasing. You just put on across whether it's digital tax, turnover tax. You just raise back up VAT to 16%. Cost of power has just gone up by 16%. Kenyans are paying twice the cost of power of United States. There is actually just no money. I mean, it's either Treasury is asleep or they are not alive to the fact that Kenyans are in dire stress. And so, while the idea is fantastic, it's the wrong timing. It's coming at a time when government has already extensively overtaxed the Kenyans. So I actually just think that is a really bad thing to do.
George, let's weigh in on that as well. Tim is saying, well, Kenya's gonna get the 500 bob if you look at what the tax regime is in the country, and going by what the figures that is put to you, that 80% of us will not actually be able to do that. And he's saying that, well, within that 80%, there's some of us who actually get below 20,000. George, a noble idea, as he's saying, but what are the details in that?
In this, I want to put it to you that universal healthcare is achievable in a country like Kenya.
Yes.
What you need to work on is the roadmap. If you compare and contrast what government is proposing with this NHIF fund with what Obamacare proposed in the US, then they kind of mirror one another. It is achievable. And let me tell you, if we can even get probably 30-40% of the Kenyan populace contributing the 500 shillings per month to NHIF, then we can achieve what the government is trying to put across. So this is a noble idea. And if it was in another country that is not Kenya, then that this should have been an idea that should be embraced. But Kenya being us being Kenyans and the Kenyan government being what it is, I want to put it that the devil is in the detail. I want to agree with my brother that probably it is a ploy to be able to mop up enough liquidity to NHIF so that government can get access to easy capital. We've seen what has happened with NSSF and NHIF in the recent past, and probably if that is not corrected, then that is where we are heading to. The government might be able to collect enough money under this scheme, but how it is utilized will be where the rubber meets the road. This money might be collected, but at the end of the day, it is channeled to something else other than universal health care. So, in my opinion, I think the government should have started by relooking at the program itself. How does it straighten, or how does it make sure that the money that is collected is used efficiently, so that citizens are able to reap maximum benefits from their contribution? But having a form of insurance or having a form of cover for health is a fantastic idea. The devil is in the implementation of it. We've seen mega corruption issues with NHIF. We've seen major corruption issues with NSSF. And I bet you not that the moment this funds flow into these agencies, then the media will start reporting serious corruption issues with those institutions. So I think the government should first of all work on how they mitigate those risks before they tell the citizenry to contribute this money to NHIF. Elijah.
Pretty much, gentlemen. I want us to take a tiny break right now. Tim, we're going to come back to that shortly. We take a tiny break. Tim, once I come back to you, you shall be picking your thoughts on that as well. Let's take that break right now.